Hello guys, this is part 48 of SQL Server. In this session we will learn about derived table and common table expression. We will compare these with other constraints that are available in SQL Server like views, table, variable, local and global temporary tables. Let's start with an example. I have TBL department table here, which has got department ID, and department name, columns, department ID and department name columns. TBL employee table here, which has got ID, name, gender, department ID columns. Now let's say I want to join these two tables and produce the output that you can see on right hand side here. I want the department name and the total number of employees within that department. But then your list should only include those department which has got two or more employees. And obviously to achieve this output, we have several ways, but then we will see how to do that using views. Okay, so we are creating view here. So we are creating view here. View name, as we are selecting department name, department ID, and count of star, which would count the number of employees within that department, and we are giving it an alias, called total employees from TBL employee join with TBL department, and obviously between these two tables department ID column is common. So we are joining those two tables on that column. And you will have to group by department name, department ID, because we want the count, and we have spoken about joins and group by in a very great detail in the previous session of this video series, so please check those parts. And we have spoken about view as well. Okay, so we are creating this view So once we have this view, it is very easy to compute this. So once we have this view, it is very easy to compute this result that you want. So the columns that you want, or the department name, total employees. So obviously we have those columns in the view. So obviously we have those columns in the views, in the view, department name, and total employees. All you have to do is select those columns. All you have to do is select those columns from that view. And then select only those departments which has got total employees. And then select only those departments which has got total employees count greater than or equal to 2. Which will give us this output. Okay, but then let's say if we are using this view only within this query, then it does not really make sense to create a view. For that purpose, that is why we have other constraints in SQL Server, which we will be exploring next. So view gets saved in the database and can be available to other queries and stored procedure as well. So if you are using this view, in other stored procedure and in other query, then that is fine. Okay, if you are using this view in other stored procedure and in other query, then that is fine. But then if you are using this as a one time, just one time in this query, then it does not really make sense to have this view created. We can make use of other constraint that are available in SQL Server, like CTE, derived tables, temp tables, table variable, etc., which we will talking now. All right, let's look at this in action. So we have these two tables. TBL employee, TBL department, you know the data, okay. So let's create this view. So let's create this view, execute. So let's create this view. Commands completed successfully. So when we refresh this folder, we should see the view there. So view get physically stored in the database. Now if you want the columns from that view, look at this. We have all the columns from the view. Select star select star from. If you say view, it would return all the columns. Within the view, we have got 3 columns within the view. We have got 3 columns: department name, department ID, and total employees. I did not select it. So select star from. If you say view, it would return all the columns within the view. We have got 3 columns: department name, department ID, and total employees. But then in our output, we are only expecting department name and total employees. So we are only selecting the required columns: department name, total employee, from that view, where total employees is greater than or equal to 2, which would return IT and HR department. We are selecting these 2 columns: total name, total employees, from this view, where total employees is greater than or equal to 2, which would return IT and HR department. Let's execute that query and we only get that. So let's execute this query and we only get that. All right. But then if you are using this view, just in this query, just in this query, then it does not really make sense to create a view. All right. Means if you are using this view just in this query, then it does not really make sense to create a view. All right. Let's see how to achieve the same thing using temporary tables. Let's see how to achieve the same thing using temporary tables. So obviously the logic to calculate the department name and total employee is exactly the same. You know, we have this query. This query will not change. It is just that we are going to use that with other constraints that are available in SQL Server. So obviously the logic to calculate the department name and total employee, the department name and total employee is exactly the same. We have this query. This query will not change. It is just that we are going to use that with other constraints that are available in SQL Server. So here we are using temp tables. Here we are using temporary table. Okay, so the query is same. So the query is same, as you can see here. So query is the same. Select department name, department ID, count of star, alias as total employees. We are giving it an alias. And we are selecting these columns. And we are selecting these columns. Into hash temp employee count. Into hash temp employee count. This is the temporary table. Table. So you might be wondering, where did you define the column that this temporary table has? When you use select into syntax, what is going to happen behind the scene? SQL Server will create those columns. for us automatically. You don't have to define the structure of the temporary table. So we are selecting these columns. So we are selecting these columns into this temporary table. You know, the rest of the logic is same. We are joining table TBL employee with TBL department. On department ID columns. On department ID column. And grouping them by department name and department ID. And grouping them by department name and department ID columns. Okay. So this logic remains same. It is just that you are selecting that data into this temporary table. And then what you are doing, it is pretty much same. After that, you want department name, you want department name, total employees. Instead of the view, you are saying from the temporary table, where total employees count, is greater than or equal to 2. Okay, let's look at this in action. And remember, since this is a temporary table, it is a good practice to actually drop the table after you have finished using it. And remember, there are two types of temporary tables. Two type of temporary table. Local temporary table and global temporary tables. Depending on the type of temporary table, you are creating the scope differs. Okay, and temporary tables are stored in TempDB. Local temporary table are visible only in the current session and can be shared between nested stored procedure, meaning if you have created a stored procedure, I mean a temporary table in stored procedure A, and if stored procedure A calls stored procedure B, then the temporary table that you have created in stored procedure A will be available in stored procedure B. So local temporary tables are visible in the current session only in the current session and can be shared between nested stored procedure calls, whereas global temporary table are visible to all the session and are destroyed when the last connection referencing the table is closed. The global temporary table is basically closed. Let's look at this in action. So we are selecting so we are selecting these columns: department name, department ID, count of star, into this temporary table, So let's execute that. So we should have the temporary table created. So let's execute this. So we should have the temporary table created. Now, so obviously when we say select star, select star, from that temporary table, you should see all the rows and columns. You should see all the rows and columns, which here is so select star from that temporary table, which here is temp employee count. Since we have a single pound sign, it is a local temporary table. We have spoken about temporary table in great details in the previous session of this video series. So if you are new, check those parts first. So we have these columns. So obviously if you want only those, department name and total employee columns, you select those two columns from that temporary table. You select those columns from that temporary table, where total employees is greater than or equal to 2. So when we execute this query, we get the expected output. So execute this. So we get the expected output. So the output is exactly similar. Except that here we are making use of temporary table instead of the view. All right, now let's look at how to do exactly the same thing using a table variable. Now let's look at how to do exactly the same thing using a table variable. Now when we created the temporary table, we did not define the structure. The structure is automatically inferred based on the select statement that you are using here, because you are using select into. because you are using select into. But then when you are using table variable, here we are defining the structure explicitly. We are defining the structure explicitly. So declare a table variable, that is the table variable. I mean a variable, and this variable is of type, and this variable is of type table. Obviously, if it is a table will have columns and data types. So you will have to define them as well. So this table is going to have department name, department ID, and total employees, just like you know, how this view, how we have this view. Department name, department ID, and total employee. Department name, department ID, and total employee. Columns. Department name, department ID, and total employees columns in the views. In the view. Okay. So next what we are doing, we are inserting into that table. We are inserting into that table, variable. Department name, this logic remains same. This logic remain the same. The query is exactly the same. We are selecting department name. Department ID, count of star from TBL employee, joining that with TBL department. On department ID, columns, and then finally grouping, grouping it by department name and department ID. So now we have this table variable. So now we have this table variable. From the table variable, you can select the required columns. From the table variable, you can select the required columns, department name, and total employee. Department name and total employees. Where total employees is equal to and greater than is greater than or equal to 2. So it is exactly it is exactly similar in the previous example. We are using temporary table. We are using the temporary table. In this example, we are using table variable. In this example, we are using the table variable. Okay, just like temporary tables, a table variable is also created in temp. Just like temporary table variable is also created in temp db. You know, most of the people think table variable is actually created in memory, which is not true. Both temporary tables and table variables are created in the temp db. The scope of a table variable is the batch or the stored procedure or a statement block in which it is declared. But the advantage of using table variable is that you can pass them as parameters between procedure calls, between one procedure to another procedure. Okay, so let's look at this in action. Obviously, it is very good practice to drop temporary table. So let's drop that table. So let's drop that table. I mean, even if you don't drop a local temporary table, it gets automatically dropped when the session that has created it is closed. So using table variable, we are creating the table structure here. Declare the table variable. This is the table variable. Specify the column's name. Specify the column name and the data types. And then insert into that table variable. And then insert into that table variable. And then select whatever column you want from that table variable. From that table variable. and select whatever column you want from that table variable. So let's execute this. We should see the same output. So let's execute this. We should see that we should the same output, except that we are using the table variable. And the advantage of using table variable is that you don't have to drop it like temporary table. But there are several other differences as well between table variables and temporary tables. All right. So we can also achieve the same thing using derived table. Now look at this. When we created a table variable, now look at this. When we created a table variable, we will have to define the columns and data type for a table variable. But whereas if you are using a derived table, if you are using a derived tables, this table is derived, so you don't really define a table as such. You just give it an alias. So if you look at this, this is the query. This is the query that we have been looking at all this while. Select department name. Select department name. Department ID, count of star as total employees from TBL employee. Joining that with the TBL department. The same query here. Now if you look at this, this query is wrapped between these two, between these brackets, and then you are saying as employee count, and then you are saying as employee count. So this entire things from this bracket to this bracket, this entire things from this bracket to this bracket, is considered as a table. This is considered as a table. Okay, a derived table, and you are giving that table a name. Employee count. And then if you look at this, the columns that are present in this table, the columns that are present in this table are nothing but the column in the select list here. So you have department name, department ID, and total employees columns. Okay, so now you treat this from here till here, from here till here as a table. So you treat this as a table employee count, table employee count. So select department name. So select department name, department total employee. So select department name, total employees. From this employee count, from this employee count, where total employees is greater than or equal to 2. So here, you know, this is a derived table. This employee count is a derived table. And derived tables are available only in the context of the current query. Only in the context of current query. Here, this select statement if you have another select statement, you know, beneath that, this derived table is not available for that select statement. It is only available here. Within this context. So let's look at this in action. If you look at this one, if you look at this one, if I execute this, it gives us those columns: department name, department ID, and total employees. If I execute this, it gives us those columns: department name, department ID, and total employees. All those columns. But then what we are essentially doing here is wrapping that inside this bracket, and then giving it a name, and this name can be treated as table by itself, which has got these 3 columns. And what you are doing from these three columns, you are selecting just department name and total employee columns, and then you are filtering on that columns. So where total employees is greater than equal to 2, where total employees is greater than or equal to 2. So obviously we only get those two rows. Where the employee count is greater than or equal to 2. In this case is IT and HR, just like other example that we have seen. And finally, we will see how to achieve the same thing using something called CTE. Something called CTE, Common Table Expression. We will be talking about we will be talking about CTE in a great detail in the next session. That is just an introduction to CTE. So achieving the same output with using a CTE, common table expression, and CTE are introduced in in SQL Server 2005. So if you look at this one, this is again very simple. So if you look at this one, this is very simple. This is again very simple. Okay, so the exact same query. That we have been working with this query that you can see here. Now what we have done is we use this keyword. With, and then you have given a name. This is nothing but the common table expression name, CTE name. So with employee count is the name of your CTE, and then you can specify the columns that your CTE returns. Okay, this part is optional. So this part is optional. If this query is returning a unique columns names, then you don't have to define this column list. You don't have to define this column list. Okay, you don't have to define this column list. Okay, but I have defined it here. Just to be clear. So this common table expression employee count is having three columns: department name, department ID, and total employees. Okay, where are these columns coming from? These columns are coming from the select query. These three columns are coming from the select query. So this select query, look at this, we have the brackets here. Look at this, we have the brackets here. So this is like a table. So this is like a table. What is the name of this table? Employee count. And this is CTE. So we use the with keyword. So we use the key with keyword. So usually the syntax for CTE is in such a way that you use the with the keyword with CTE name. With CTE name. The column that your CTE returns, the column that your CTE returns as, and your select query, and your select query. Actually determine, and your select query actually determines what columns are being returned by the CTE. All right, so we are done. This is pretty much similar to derived table. This is pretty much similar to derived table. Now if you look at this derived table, this query returns, it is like a table. You are just naming it as employee count. Along the same line, for a CTE, this query, and you are saying with CTE name and the columns as, and then your query. Obviously, then what you can do is, since this is treated as a table, now a common table expression, and this common table expression has got 3 columns just like derived table, and out of these 3 columns we just want a department name and total employees. Columns, total employees columns. From that CTE, which is employee count here, where total where total employees is greater than or equal to 2. So we get the same output. Let's look that in action. So that is the CTE. So that is the CTE. So let's execute this and we should get the same output. So let's execute this and we should get the same output. All right. All right. A CTE can be thought of as a temporary result set. A CTE can be thought of as a temporary result set. It is a temporary table, or you can also think of as a derived table that is defined within the execution scope of a single select, insert, update, delete, or create view statement. You can use this CTE even within a view, okay? But this is defined only within the execution scope of a single select, insert, update, delete, or create view statement. This is a little confusing. What we mean by this, we are going to talk about common table expression in a great detail in a next session. I will explain this definition clearly, in the next video session. And a CTE is similar, and a CTE is similar to a derived table in that it is not stored as an object and lasts only for the duration of the query. So this is not being stored as a temporary table or a view, okay? It is only last for duration of this query. Outside context of this query, the CTE does not really have any meaning. We will talk about CTE in a great detail in the next session of this video series. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.